The courtroom buzzed with tension, a low murmur rippling through the gallery as people filed into their seats. There was an electric anticipation in the air, not the kind that comes with celebrity trials or political scandals, but the kind that signals something long overdue was about to happen. Today was the hearing of Officer Ray Dalton, a name that, for many in the city, came laced with fear and disgust. A man who had turned his badge into a weapon, his authority into a shield, and his prejudices into policies. He was the kind of cop who cruised neighborhoods of color looking for problems, the kind who could stop you just for breathing too loudly. Ray Dalton had been a specter in many lives, especially among black and brown communities. And for years, he got away with it. But today, something was different. In the front row of the courtroom, a woman sat alone, calm, composed, radiating a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the room. Even the judge, who had seen his share of hardened criminals and bold attorneys, glanced her way more than once. Her name was Camille Harper. To most in the room, she looked like just another black woman seeking justice. To Ray Dalton, she was someone he barely remembered, just another stop, another hassle, another body to throw in the system. What Ray didn't know was who she really was. Ray straightened the front of his uniform, the navy blue fabric stiff and neatly pressed. He wore like armor, confident, smug even. After all, how many complaints had come and gone? How many internal affairs reports had vanished? What was one more charge in a sea of accusations that never stuck? He took the stand with a smirk twitching at the corner of his lips. The defense attorney went first, downplaying the charges. They called them procedural missteps. They said Ray was acting in good faith under pressure. The charges were clear, though: unlawful use of force, racial profiling, excessive aggression. Ray didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. Then Camille Harper stood up, and the air shifted. It had happened 3 months earlier. Camille was walking home after a long meeting downtown. She worked late often. Being a federal prosecutor didn't come with light hours. The streets were quiet, the kind of peaceful stillness that warned you not to get too comfortable. Then came the flashing red and blue lights. She paused, kept her hands visible, didn't panic. She'd given seminars on this exact scenario. A patrol car crept beside her, window rolling down. "You! Hands where I can see them," a voice barked. The voice of Officer Ray Dalton. He stepped out, his hand already resting near his holster. Camille raised her hands slightly, frowning. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You match the description of suspect," Ray said, not missing a beat. "And what description is that?" she asked, her tone polite, firm. "Black female. Alone. At night," he snapped. Before she could speak again, Ray grabbed her arm, yanked it back, and twisted it behind her. Pain shot through her shoulder. "You have no right," she protested. "I have every right." He cut her off, shoving her against the hood of his car. "You people always think you can talk back." That was his mistake. He thought she was powerless. Camille didn't fight. She let him cuff her, let him haul her to the station, let him toss her in a holding cell like a piece of trash. She said nothing. Not then, because she was waiting. The next morning, the police station received a phone call that sent the entire department into a tailspin. Within an hour, Camille was released. No charges. No apology. Just silence. Ray was summoned to the captain's office. He walked in expecting a slap on the wrist, maybe some desk duty, worst case. But the captain's face was pale. "Dalton," he said, voice tight, "you have any idea who you arrested last night?" Ray scoffed. "Just some woman mouthing off." The captain slammed a file down on the desk. "That woman is Camille Harper, federal prosecutor, Harvard Law, and she's leading the Department of Justice investigation into police corruption." Ray went silent. Now, back in the courtroom, Camille approached the witness stand. "Officer Dalton," she said, voice even unwavering, "do you recall the night of June 14th? Ray shifted in his seat. "I don't recall the details." "Let me refresh your memory," she said, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I have video evidence." A hush fell over the room. The screen lit up. Surveillance footage. Dashcam. Bodycam. There was Ray grabbing her, twisting her arms. slamming her into the car, hurling racial slurs. Gasps echoed around the courtroom. Ray went pale. Camille looked him in the eyes. "Do you recall now?" He didn't answer. The trial stretched for 2 weeks. Witnesses came forward: black teens, Latina mothers, an elderly Vietnamese man, each with stories of Officer Ray Dalton's cruelty. Every testimony painted a darker picture. A man who hid behind his badge and treated the law like a joke. In the end, the verdict was read aloud. Guilty on all counts. Ray's world collapsed. Camille watched as the bailiff cuffed him, irony dripping from every clang of the metal. This time, he was the one powerless. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to the cameras, knowing what this moment meant. A message. Justice isn't blind. Justice remembers. But this was only the beginning. The media storm hit within hours of the verdict. Cable news channels ran Camille Harper's name across every cheering. Headlines blared. Federal prosecutor takes down corrupt cop. Officer Dalton found guilty in landmark civil rights case. Camille Harper, the woman who shook the system. For many, Camille became a symbol, a modern crusader against systemic abuse. But for Camille, it was just another step. A hard-earned one, yes, but only a single brick in the long road she'd been paving for years. She didn't bask in the spotlight. She didn't grant interviews. Instead, she returned to her office late that night, sat at her desk, and stared at the wall where a map of the city was pinned with red string and yellow post-it notes. Ray Dalton had just been the beginning. In a locked drawer of her filing cabinet, Camille kept a list, names she had gathered over nearly 7 years. Officers with a long string of civilian complaints. Supervisors who helped clean up bad arrests. Detectives who turned a blind eye to abuse. Internal affairs investigators who buried reports. The deeper she had dug, the more rot she'd found. With Dalton behind bars, the dam had cracked. By Monday morning, Camille had 3 voicemails from former officers, 2 anonymous tips from city employees. 1 handwritten letter slid under her office door from the mother of a teenager who had died in custody. And 1 email, marked urgent. The subject line read, "You want to know who protected Dalton? Start with Captain Wells." Captain David Wells had been a decorated officer for nearly 3 decades. On paper, he was a hero. Commendations, community service awards, even a city council resolution in his honor. But Camille knew how to read between the lines. He had overseen Ray Dalton's precinct for 6 years. Every time Dalton's name came up in an excessive force complaint, Wells's initials were on the resolution. Coincidence? Not likely. Camille opened the internal investigation log. Complaint number 872. Complainant, Marisol Jimenez. Age 27. Alleged that Officer Dalton slammed her face into a patrol car after stopping her for driving suspiciously. No charges were filed. The complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated within 48 hours. Signed off by Captain Wells. She flipped through more, so many that her eyes blurred. Camille leaned back, letting out a breath. They didn't just enable Dalton. They shielded him. That evening, she met with her task force. A small but fiercely dedicated team of federal investigators, analysts, and legal aides. They gathered in a dimly lit conference room, documents spread across the table like a battle map. "Wells?" asked Jerome, a DOJ investigator with a background in forensic auditing. "He's untouchable. Political ties. Donor connections. He has friends in the mayor's office." Camille nodded. "Then we start with the money." They traced old misconduct settlements, quietly paid out, never admitted. Dozens of thousands of dollars. All funded from a discretionary litigation reserve buried deep in the city's budget. Payments made with no receipts, no public statements. "Pull the contracts," Camille instructed. "I want to know which attorneys handled the settlements. And I want sealed depositions. If we can get just one reopened." 2 days later, Jerome dropped a thick manila folder on her desk. "Bingo," he said. Inside were redacted testimonies from a 2019 case involving an officer under Wells's command, Officer Jared Lennon. The officer was accused of planting evidence on a young black man during a drug stop. The city settled quietly. But Camille recognized the language in the deposition. It was scrubbed, coached. The answers were too perfect. Someone had tampered with it. That night, Camille got a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice. Quiet, tense. You don't know me, but I worked under Wells. I saw what he did. I saw what Dalton did. I covered for them. We all did. Camille's heart rate slowed, her voice steady. Why are you calling now? Because I thought it would all blow over. But it's not. You're not letting it go. And I have a daughter now. I can't live with this anymore. She leaned forward, her voice soft. What's your name? A pause. Detective Michael Raleigh. And just like that, the dominoes began to fall. Michael met with Camille the next day, off the record, in an empty parking garage on the south side. He was pale, tired, and clearly racked with guilt. I falsified reports, he confessed. Wells told us to. Said it was about protecting the department's reputation. Dalton? He was his attack dog. Whenever something had to get cleaned up, Wells sent Dalton in. Sometimes it was about intimidating witnesses. Other times, it was about punishing people who made complaints. Camille nodded slowly. Do you have proof? I kept copies, he said. Not all, but enough. I have a drive. It's encrypted. Bring it to me, she said. I'll get you immunity if it holds up. He looked at her, trembling. You're going to burn it all down, aren't you? I'm going to clean it out, Camille replied. Burning would be too easy. As she drove home that night, the weight of it all settled on her shoulders. Justice wasn't glamorous. It was grueling, slow, and often thankless. But moments like this, when someone broke the silence, when the truth began to crack through the darkness, they reminded her why she kept going. She parked outside her apartment, the street quiet again, just like that night 3 months ago. But this time, she felt no fear. Because the system that once protected Ray Dalton had just been pierced. And Camille Harper had only just begun.